Humans are primitive, the Zelthari trooper said, laughter clicking through his mandibles. Then why are your hands shaking? A calm human voice replied from just behind his neck. The scream that followed lasted less than a second before the security feed dissolved into static and the entire war room fell silent. High Commander Threx paused the hologram and stared at the frozen last frame, at the shine of the human visor just before the distortion hit, and for the first time since he had taken command of the Third Armada he realized the silence in the hall was not respect but fear. The war room was a layered circle of consoles and hanging displays, filled with green and blue glows that washed over scales and armor. Officers stood rigid at their stations, eyes flicking between the frozen image and Threx, as if waiting to see whether they should laugh at this or flee from it. The closest aide cleared his throat with a wet click. Probably a primitive sabotage trick, Commander. Visual distortion, audio overlay, nothing more. Threx did not answer immediately. He enlarged the image, zoomed in on the trooper's hands. Even in the frozen frame, they were trembling. Fear responses. Elevated heart rate. Dilated pupils. The biometric bar along the side had spiked the moment before the figure appeared behind him, a tall silhouette in matte black armor, edges indistinct, visor dark. Threx shut off the feed and the hologram ring dimmed. Restart the recording from the beginning, he said. This was the fourth patrol they had lost in orbit around the human colony on Luna Station. The other three had vanished, no telemetry, no wreckage. This one had died screaming, and that made it valuable. The feed restarted with the standard patrol banter, the kind of useless chatter Threx despised, complaints about human gravity standards, jokes about how soft human bones were, betting pools about how long Earth would hold out once the main fleets arrived. Behind the voices, the quiet hum of unfamiliar ventilation systems, the echo of armored boots on metal. Then the moment the trooper walked past a dark junction, looked over his shoulder, saw nothing, and laughed. Humans are primitive. Then the voice, smooth, amused, sounding as if it were already bored of the conversation. Then the scream. Static. End. That is the fourth time, Admiral Vassery said from the lower tier, his gills flexing around his neck armor. 4 patrols lost, and not a single image of a human squad. No shots fired. No hull breaches. Only this. He gestured at the empty air where the frozen human had been. Threx turned slowly to face the ring of officers. You have all heard the rumors, he said. His voice was calm, but the tips of his claws pressed against his palm plates hard enough that the sensory mesh registered it as pain. About Earth's armies. About their planetary defense fleets. Every time humans join a war, casualty predictions become unreliable. The simulations fail. Ground campaigns collapse. The smaller officers shifted uncomfortably. We have always accounted for that, Threx went on. It is why we chose overwhelming numbers. It is why we struck their diplomatic ship first, to break their coordination. It is why the warlord authorized the preemptive strike. A murmur swept the room and then faded when Threx raised a hand. But this, he said, this is not an army. A junior intelligence officer spoke up too quickly, voice nervous. It might be a special forces squad, Commander. Elite unit. Humans are fond of naming things dramatically. Reapers, ghosts, angels, that sort of thing. We have intercepts of their media. Threx's eyes narrowed. Say that name again. The officer hesitated. Reaper, Commander. One of the code names we have seen on encrypted human channels. No confirmed identities, no visuals. It appears in after-action reports where Allied alien units reported impossible turnarounds in battle, but the data is inconsistent. High Command never confirmed the existence of such an operative. Threx felt the war room tilt, as if gravity had shifted a degree to the left. He had seen the word in old campaign files, half redacted, associated with human conflicts where entire armored divisions disappeared overnight and enemy command bunkers collapsed from within. Until now he had dismissed it as enemy myth-making. Even humans need their monsters, he had told himself. Now the words sat in the air like a live explosive. Before he could reply, the main holoprojector flared to life with an incoming priority signal stamped in red. Origin, Terran Coalition Central Command. The room tensed. We are in the middle of reviewing an incident, Threx said. Put it in queue. The comms officer's throat sacs fluttered. Commander, it is a system-wide broadcast, he said. They are transmitting on all frequencies in our occupied sectors. It is addressed to the Galactic Council and any Zelthri fleet currently in human space. Threx's frill stiffened. Display it. The hologram shifted, and a human flag unfurled in the air, light woven from data. Then a human figure appeared, not in armor but in an austere dark uniform with a flat blue patch over the heart. The alien officers leaned forward, surprised at how ordinary the creature looked. Narrow shoulders. Soft skin. No visible weapon. But the eyes were steady and burning with a kind of cold focus that made Threx's jaw tighten. This is Admiral Serena Cole of Earth Fleet High Command, the human said. Her voice rang through the chamber with translator overlays in a dozen tongues. You destroyed an unarmed diplomatic vessel under safe passage. You killed our negotiators, our scientists, our children. You believed that striking first would prevent a war you could not control. You were wrong. Around Threx, some officers hissed in disdain, others snorted. Standard human outrage broadcasts, Vassery muttered. They do this every time someone scratches one of their border posts. Wait, Threx said quietly. Cole's gaze did not waver. Earth will respond with military force, she said. Our armies and fleets will engage yours within the bounds of war. Your simulations have already told you how that ends for your ground forces. We will do everything in our power to avoid extermination on either side. But understand this. Her expression hardened, and the ambient noise of the war room seemed to drain away. You have been preparing for the wrong fight. You fear our armies. You fear our fleets. You fear the weapons you can count on a screen. But the thing you should fear most is not on any of your charts. Threx's claws tightened again. His mind flashed back to the frozen image of the troopers shaking hands and the dark visor behind him. We have authorized a previously retired asset for this conflict, Cole said. There were no drums, no swelling music, no visual dramatics, just a simple shift in her tone that made it sound like she had just opened a door onto deep space. You will not see him in your battle reports until it is already too late. You may not see him at all. The translators hesitated for a fraction of a second on the next word as if the language libraries needed to double-check it. His designation is Reaper. The broadcast ended just like that, no threats, no. Jackson Hale did not hear the broadcast that shook half the galaxy. He was in the middle of chopping firewood behind his cabin in Montana, sleeves rolled up, sweat running down the bridge of his nose despite the mountain cold. His dog, a graying mutt named Ranger, watched him with the bored tolerance of an old soldier who had seen this routine too many times. The calm beacon on his porch had been dead for years, buried under dust and disuse, until it crackled like a dying hornet and made Ranger growl. Jackson paused mid-swing. That thing should only activate if Earth Fleet forced the channel open. He lowered the axe and walked toward the noise, boots crunching over pine needles. When he lifted the receiver, the voice on the other end was a mixture of static and clipped panic. Hale, this is Director Vaughn. We have an activation order. You are being recalled to service. Jackson almost laughed. He tapped the receiver with a knuckle. Wrong, Hale, Director. I retired 10 years ago. Find someone younger who still has something to prove. The voice sharpened. This is not optional. Reaper protocol has been reinstated. His hand tightened on the receiver, and for the first time in years, he felt the cold weight of the old name settle onto his shoulders. The director continued speaking, but Jackson hung up. Not out of disrespect, but because he didn't need the explanation. If Earth was desperate enough to activate the protocol, something catastrophic had already happened. Ranger nudged his leg, sensing the shift in him. Jackson took a slow breath, the air stinging with pine resin and winter frost. He walked inside the cabin. The walls were lined with books, maps, and a few framed photos turned face down. He ignored everything except one small wooden box under his bed. He pulled it out, brushed off the dust, and opened it. Inside was a single dog tag, bent at the edges, belonging to his younger sister Mara Hale, a diplomat and conflict negotiator who always believed peace was possible even when he didn't. He had not heard from her in weeks, but that was normal for someone who traveled between systems. He held the tag between his fingers and felt the familiar ache in his chest. A second beacon lit up on his table, this time flashing red. Emergency broadcast. Unauthenticated. He activated it. A hologram flickered into the center of the room, shaky and damaged. It was footage of a burning starship drifting in space, hull torn open like a gutted animal. Debris scattered like ash around it. A label flashed at the bottom of the image: Diplomatic Vessel Orion Dawn. Mara's ship. The broadcast continued, showing evacuation pods ruptured from the outside, scorch marks indicating weapon fire. Jackson's pulse slowed, the way it always did when something hurt too much to feel. Ranger whined softly. The recording ended with a final message from Earth Fleet. No survivors recovered. Suspected Zelthari attack. Confirmed hostile act. Effective immediately, Earth enters wartime state. Jackson set the dog tag on the table and rested both hands on its edges. His sister had once told him he carried too much of the world in his shoulders. She had said it with a smile, but he always felt the truth behind it. Now all he felt was the old weight sliding back into place, familiar as his own shadow. He walked toward the far end of the cabin, where an innocent-looking bookshelf stood. He pressed his palm to the spine of a faded geography book, and the entire structure shifted with a mechanical groan, revealing a recessed stairway leading underground. Ranger stayed at the top, tail low, not following this time. Even he seemed to know that once Jackson went down those steps, he would not come back the same. The bunker lights flickered on as Jackson descended. The room was compact but densely packed with equipment sealed in matte black cases. He cracked open the first one. Inside lay the Reaper suit, improved since he last wore it. Matte carbon plates, integrated stealth mesh that shimmered faintly with adaptive camo, and a redesigned helmet with a minimalist visor and internal targeting feed. Next to it lay his weapons, a modular rifle with variable barrel attachments, a compact plasma blade, and a coil pistol with enough stopping power to tear through Zelthari armor. He lifted the helmet and studied the faint scratches across the side. Those marks had history. Those marks had names. Before he donned the armor, he activated the mission terminal built into the wall. Director Vaughn's face appeared, strained and exhausted. Hale, listen carefully. The Orion Dawn was intentionally targeted. We have evidence the Zelthari intend a full-scale extermination strike on Earth. Their fleets are mobilizing. They believe taking out our diplomats would cripple our response. They miscalculated. His jaw clenched, but he did not speak. Vaughn continued. We need you to infiltrate 3 key Zelthari systems. Locate the warlord who authorized the attack. Neutralize the command network. And Hale, the Council is convinced that if the war escalates, billions will die. You are our surgical option. Jackson strapped the chest plate on, the magnetic locks clicking into place. His voice was steady, low. My sister was on that ship. Vaughn hesitated. I know, Hale. And we will honor her. But right now, the mission must come first. Jackson paused for a long moment before answering. The mission is the only thing that matters. A small voice sounded behind him. Sir, your vitals are already spiking. Please remain calm. Jackson glanced back to see recruit Jensen, barely old enough to shave, standing nervously beside the med console. The kid was shaking. Jackson raised an eyebrow. You volunteering to calm me down, kid? Jensen's voice cracked. No, sir. I mean yes, sir. I'm here to help. Jackson almost smiled. Then stop looking like you're about to faint. It's distracting. The kid blurted out an apology so fast he tripped over his own boot, grabbing a crate to stop himself from falling. Jackson shook his head once. Earth Fleet was still recruiting children who thought war was a training sim. He locked the last piece of armor into place. The moment the suit sealed, the hum of power vibrated through his body like a heartbeat syncing with his own. He walked past Jensen toward the exit tunnel. The mission briefing loaded into his visor: infiltration route, target profiles, planetary layouts. But none of it mattered as much as the small bent dog tag tucked into the suit's inner pocket. He reached the surface, mountain wind hitting him with sharp cold. Ranger stood waiting, tail still. Jackson knelt beside him and placed a hand on his head. "Guard the house." Ranger pressed his forehead against the armor once, then stepped back. Jackson activated the stealth field and vanished into the treeline, his footprints fading seconds later. Far above him, Earth fleet carriers cracked through the cloud layers, engines roaring toward orbit. But Jackson Hale did not need an army. He had a mission. And somewhere in the vast dark between stars, the Zelthari warlord who had taken his sister was waiting. Jackson would find him. And the galaxy would learn the difference between fearing an army and fearing a single man. Gorthos was a world no sane creature visited willingly. Its surface looked like a scar across space, a burning landscape of molten rivers, fractured obsidian, and industrial drills taller than skyscrapers. The heat alone should have cooked Jackson inside his armor, but the adaptive cooling mesh kept him steady as he crouched on a ridge overlooking the main mining facility. The Zelthari had turned the planet into a furnace-powered fortress, but that didn't matter. All Jackson needed was one entry point and one mistake from the enemy. He got his first within seconds. A pair of guards stood at a checkpoint near a conveyor tunnel, complaining about human resistance reports. Their mandibles clattered irritably. "Humans panic easily," one said. "They scream and hide. They are predictable." Jackson slid down the ridge without a sound, moving through the shimmering waves of heat. When the wind shifted, he ghosted behind them. Neither guard had time to turn before he disabled both with swift, silent strikes, dragging their bodies behind a slag pile. He entered the tunnel, helmet visor adjusting to the deeper red glow as machinery echoed through the walls like the heartbeat of a dying world. Gorthos was supposed to be a resource planet, but as Jackson advanced deeper, he saw signs it had become something else. The tunnels broadened unnaturally. Extra security nodes had been welded into the walls. Strange symbols were scratched onto support beams, as if someone had tried to leave warnings. The air smelled wrong, even filtered through the rebreather, a mix of scorched metal and something acidic. When he reached a wide operations hall, he stopped. In the center were half a dozen humans in torn clothing, their ankles chained to a generator console. They looked malnourished, exhausted, faces hollowed by fear and heat exposure. Some were too weak to even lift their heads. Jackson scanned the hall. No patrols. No movement. Too quiet. He moved toward them carefully. One of the prisoners, an older man with gray stubble and burns on his arms, lifted his head. His eyes widened when he saw Jackson materialize from the cloaking shimmer. "Thank God," he whispered. "You're real." Jackson knelt beside him and began cutting the restraints with a thermal blade. "How long have you been here?" "Weeks. Maybe more. They keep us alive because they're studying something down below. Something they dug up. Something they shouldn't have." Jackson paused, senses sharpening. "What did they find?" The man swallowed hard. "The Zelthari said it was a species older than them. Older than any of us. They call it the First Hunger. They said if they control it, they won't need an army to conquer Earth. They'll just let it loose." Jackson's hands stilled around the chain for a moment. Then he finished slicing it open. "Get the others ready to move." "But we can't go through the main tunnel," the man said. "They'll fry us with the heat cannons." Jackson stood slowly, analyzing the hall. Then he noticed an old maintenance chute high above, partially sealed with rusted clamps. "That'll work." He carried the prisoners up one by one, boosting them into the chute, even as sweat trickled inside his armor. The last prisoner, a young woman barely in her 20s, trembled as he lifted her. "Will they come after us?" "Only if they know you're missing," Jackson said. "And they won't know until I want them to." Once the last civilian crawled into the chute, Jackson sealed it behind them with a time charge that would disguise their escape as a structural collapse. Then he turned toward the main elevator shaft leading deeper underground. Every step down felt like walking into a furnace mouth. The metal walls glowed faintly, the air shimmering. At the bottom of the shaft, he found the entrance to a chamber that did not belong on a mining world. The doors were carved stone, ancient, etched with patterns that made no sense in Zelthri architecture. They pulsed faintly as if breathing. Jackson approached with caution, weapons ready. The doors slid open without him touching them. Inside was a massive vault lined with alien conduits, glowing prisms, and containment fields that flickered like lightning trapped in cages. At the center stood a tall figure in a white lab coat stained with ash and soot. A human. Jackson froze. The man turned startled. His face was gaunt, but his eyes were sharp. Hail. Jackson leveled his weapon instantly. Identify yourself. Dr. Elias Rowan, he said quickly. Former Earth scientist. Former, because someone sold us out, Jackson said. Rowan's jaw tightened. You don't understand. I wasn't selling out Earth. I was saving it. Jackson stepped closer, voice low. Start explaining before your heartbeat becomes the next thing this room measures. Rowan glanced nervously toward the containment fields. The Zelthri have been excavating this planet for decades. They discovered an ancient species buried here, something their ancestors imprisoned. They want to weaponize it, and yes, they forced me to help. But I know how to stop them. Jackson studied him, reading every twitch, every flicker of uncertainty. Who ordered the attack on the Orion Dawn? Rowan hesitated too long. Jackson's grip tightened on the trigger. The Zelthri warlord, he said finally, voice cracking. He needed to accelerate the timeline. He knew your sister was on board. He knew activating you would force us military to respond. He hoped the chaos would help free the thing in those cages. Jackson's entire body went still. His voice, when it came, was as cold as vacuum. Show me where he is. Before Rowan could answer, a thunderous metallic roar erupted from the far end of the chamber. A massive mining mech, retrofitted with weapons and armor plates, burst through a reinforced wall, molten debris spraying around it. Its 3 heated claws glowed white, and its sensor array locked directly onto Jackson. Rowan dove for cover, screaming. Jackson rolled as a claw slammed into the floor where he'd stood, melting stone on impact. The mech swung again, its movements jerky but fast, driven by both machine logic and desperate alien control. Jackson fired several rounds into its joints, sparks exploding, but the mech lumbered forward undeterred. He sprinted toward the scaffolding, using the terrain to his advantage as the mech ripped through pipes and conduits behind him. The heat was intense, blistering even behind armor. Jackson grabbed a loose mining drill from a collapsed station and turned sharply. He vaulted off a broken platform, landed on the mech's back, and rammed the drill into its sensor core. The machine spasmed violently as molten sparks erupted around him. Jackson held on until the mech staggered, stumbled, then collapsed in a heap of molten metal. He dropped to the floor, panting inside the helmet. Rowan emerged from hiding, eyes wide. That was not supposed to be down here. Jackson grabbed him by the collar. Warlord. Now. Rowan pointed to a terminal, hands shaking. His flagship is in orbit above the vault. He oversees the excavation personally. Jackson entered a command, downloading the warlord's coordinates. As he turned toward the exit, Rowan called after him. You can't face him alone. You don't understand what he has unleashed. Jackson didn't stop walking. I don't need to understand it. I just need to end it. He reached the shaft and activated his grappling line, ascending toward the surface as alarms blared across the facility. Before leaving the cavern entirely, he glanced once at the containment. News of the attack on Gorthos spread through the galaxy faster than any fleet could travel. Entire Zelthri outposts reported sudden silence from their mining world, followed by fractured transmissions of burning tunnels, collapsing machinery, and one terrifying phrase picked up across multiple channels: Reaper was here. Jackson did not wait to bask in the panic. He was already sprinting across the molten ground toward a collapsed shuttle bay, trying to reach higher ground before the warlord's flagship completed its descent. The planet trembled under the ship's gravity wells, turning the air into a vibrating haze. Rivers of lava churned around him, and chunks of brittle obsidian cracked beneath his boots. A wing of alien fighters streaked across the sky, launching probing bursts of plasma that scorched the ground behind him. He slid behind a jagged rock formation, breathing steadily as the suit cooled his body. His visor tracked the warlord's ship as it deployed armored landing pods that slammed into the surface, cracking stone and throwing molten debris in all directions. The Zelthri were flooding the area with troops, unaware that their numbers meant nothing against one man with enough motivation to dismantle an empire. His visor pinged a new alert. Multiple human life signatures detected nearby. Jackson frowned. He thought he'd evacuated all survivors earlier. He moved quickly toward the signal and found a wrecked containment vehicle half buried under obsidian debris. The hatch was sealed from the outside and scorched by weapons fire. He forced it open, and the intense heat poured out like the breath of a furnace. Inside were a dozen humans curled together, dehydrated and barely conscious. The young woman he rescued earlier blinked at him weakly. "Thought you left us," she whispered. Jackson cut their restraints. "Never assume that," he replied, lifting the weakest onto his shoulder. He guided them through a narrow field of slag and molten rock. A second tremor shook the surface, knocking one man to his knees. Jackson helped him up and pushed them toward a sheltered rock crevice. Once the group was secured, he scanned the sky again. The warlord's forces were spreading out in formation. This many troops on one planet meant only one thing: they were preparing for a full-scale excavation of the ancient species imprisoned beneath Gorthos. Jackson's jaw tightened as he remembered Rowan's words. The first hunger. Older than the Zelthri. Something the warlord wanted to unleash. Something he thought he could control. Jackson knew better. Anything ancient enough to terrify an empire was nothing but a weapon waiting to erase every living thing it touched. He moved along the cliffside until he reached the fallen spire of an old mining tower. From there, he had a vantage point over the Zelthri encampment. Hundreds of alien troops marched in synchronized lines, hauling massive power conduits toward a glowing fissure in the ground. Strange pulses of energy radiated from below, twisting the air. Even from a distance, Jackson felt the wrongness of it, something primal, like standing near the mouth of a starving beast. His helmet registered a faint low-frequency vibration, almost like a heartbeat rising from underground. He zoomed in on the command platform at the center of the enemy formation. The warlord stood there. Tall, armored in jagged obsidian-like plates, and wielding a staff tipped with a pulsing crimson shard. His voice echoed across the battleground through amplified speakers. "The humans have sent their phantom," he declared, mandibles rattling with confidence. "Let him come. We have unlocked what our ancestors feared. We command the power of the first hunger." The troops roared in approval. Jackson almost pitied them. Almost. He leapt from the cliff and used a grappling line to swing across a collapsed mining arch. His landing was silent. He moved through the shadows cast by molten rivers, his adaptive camo flickering to match the environment. A patrol passed inches from him, unaware of his presence. Jackson slipped behind them and continued toward the command platform. But before he reached the warlord, another alert flared on his visor. A human cryoship signal. Extremely faint. Buried beneath the planet's surface. Jackson hesitated only a moment before rerouting. If humans were trapped underground with that ancient creature, time was even shorter than he thought. He reached a sealed cavern entrance, and used a combination of explosives and brute strength to force his way in. Inside lay a massive cryopod transport, cracked open and leaking coolant. The metal around it had been clawed from the outside, leaving deep gouges that made his skin crawl. Inside the cryopod, a child no older than 10 lay unconscious, breathing shallowly but alive. Jackson lifted him carefully. The boy stirred and whispered, "Please don't let the monsters take me." Jackson's voice softened in a way few ever heard. "Not today." He carried the boy out of the cavern and activated his emergency extraction beacon. A drone ship shot down through the atmosphere, grabbed the child with a magnetic harness, and shot back upward before the enemy forces detected it. As the drone vanished into the sky, Jackson turned back toward the warlord with renewed focus. When he reached the main platform again, the excavation had advanced. Energy beams drilled into the fissure, and something beneath the surface responded with a low, resonant growl. Even the aliens looked unsettled. The warlord raised his staff triumphantly. Today marks the beginning of our ascension. The first hunger will serve us and crush Earth beneath our feet. Jackson stepped out of the shadows, cloak fading. Or it'll start with you. The warlord froze. Hundreds of alien soldiers turned toward him in shock, weapons rising. Jackson's posture was relaxed, almost casual. His voice carried across the entire battlefield. You killed my sister. You targeted my people. You think you're controlling whatever is below this planet, but trust me. You can't. And I'm not here to negotiate. The warlord snarled and pointed his staff at Jackson. Kill him. The first wave of troops charged. Jackson moved faster. He grabbed a fallen power conduit, slammed it into the ground, and activated its energy core. A shockwave erupted, sending dozens of aliens flying backward. He sprinted into the chaos, disarming soldiers, breaking armor, cutting through lines with precision and controlled fury. Plasma bolts whizzed past him, some hitting his armor, others missing as he twisted through their formations. He moved like a force of nature, more fluid than any creature they'd seen, never staying in one place long enough to be targeted. As he approached the platform, the fissure behind the warlord split wider, releasing a pulse of dark energy that sent a tremor through the sky. For the first time, the warlord looked afraid. Jackson vaulted onto the platform. The warlord turned to face him. You cannot stop what has begun. Jackson answered by slamming the warlord back with a punch that cracked his armor. Their fight erupted across the platform, each strike echoing through the battlefield. Plasma sparks flew. The ground shook with their impacts. Beneath them, the first hunger growled again, louder now, as if awakened by their violence. Jackson grabbed the warlord and slammed him against the control console. Then he looked. The dreadnought's shadow swallowed the battlefield, dimming even the molten glow of Gorthos. Jackson could feel the vibrations tremble through the ground, through the bones of the planet itself. The warlord lay crumpled against the shattered console, armor cracked and flickering with dying power lines. The alien's breathing was shallow and ragged, but his eyes burned with defiance. Jackson didn't spare him another glance. The warlord was no longer the immediate threat. The dreadnought descending from orbit meant the Zelthri leadership had decided to take control personally, and that meant they were preparing to unleash the first hunger by force if Jackson didn't stop them first. He activated the visor's long-range scan. The dreadnought's lower hangar bay was already opening, releasing rows of armored carriers and heavy shock troops who began landing in coordinated formations. Jackson estimated under a minute before the area became flooded with enemy reinforcements. He needed to move. Fast. He started toward the nearest ledge, but a familiar voice crackled through his helmet. Hail, this is Director Vaughn. We have intercepted battle signals. The Zelthri dreadnought is preparing a planetary core strike. Jackson vaulted over a broken beam as plasma fire scorched the ground where he'd stood. They're trying to crack open the vault, he said. Can't let that happen. You won't be able to stop a core detonation alone, Vaughn warned. Reinforcements are still hours away. Not alone, Jackson replied, slowing only when he spotted movement near the fissure. It was Rowan, the scientist from earlier, running toward him while carrying a large crystalline device pressed against his chest. Jackson's first instinct was to raise his weapon, but Rowan lifted the device in desperation. Don't shoot. I have something you need. Jackson approached him cautiously. If you brought another one of your brilliant ideas that blows up planets, I'm not in the mood. Rowan shook his head. I stole the stabilizer core. Without this, the Zelthri cannot finish the release sequence. But the warlord already damaged the containment fields. We have minutes before the first hunger wakes fully. Jackson grabbed the device from him and slung it onto his armor's magnetic clamps. Then show me how to shut it down. Rowan hesitated. We need another person. Jackson frowned. Why? Someone has to reroute the energy manually from inside. The system wasn't built for autonomous control. Jackson stared at the scientist long enough that Rowan took a step back. You realize that sounds like a suicide job, Jackson said. Rowan looked away. I know. Which is why I'm coming with you. Before Jackson could respond, the ground erupted as a plasma mortar exploded nearby. Troops from the dreadnought had spotted them. Jackson pulled Rowan behind a collapsed tower just in time to avoid another barrage. Figures in heavy armor advanced steadily, supported by floating drones that scanned the terrain. Jackson counted their formations. Too many for a direct assault. Too many to outrun. He gripped Rowan's arm. We're changing plans. We're not going through the vault entrance. Rowan blinked. Then where? Jackson pointed toward a narrow ventilation rift barely large enough for a single soldier. That chute goes into the central summoning chamber. How do you know that? Jackson didn't answer. He had studied the facility layout earlier, memorizing structural weaknesses before the mech attack drove him off track. They ran toward the crevice, sliding into cover as enemy beams traced over their heads. Rowan stumbled, but Jackson dragged him forward until they reached the rift. Jackson went first, dropping into the tight, spiraling shaft. The heat grew sharper the deeper they descended, wrapping around them like a furnace. Rowan followed, panting and struggling to keep up. At the bottom, the shaft opened into a stone corridor lined with ancient carvings. The air pulsed with energy. A deep, rhythmic sound echoed in the distance. Jackson felt it in his spine, in the marrow of his bones. The first hunger was stirring. Rowan shivered. If that thing wakes, it will kill everything on this planet and keep spreading. Jackson adjusted the stabilizer core on his back. Then we make sure it doesn't wake. They moved down the corridor until it opened into a massive underground chamber that dwarfed anything Jackson had seen. The containment fields flickered like dying stars, and behind them something enormous shifted in the darkness. A shape that was not a shape. A presence that seemed to warp the air. Rowan swallowed hard. It's trying to break through. We need to reach the central console. It controls the sealing mechanism. Jackson surveyed the chamber. The console was on a raised platform surrounded by chasms of molten stone and half-collapsed bridges. Alien machinery hummed weakly, overloaded from earlier sabotage. Jackson looked at Rowan. Once we start the override, Zeltari reinforcements will pour in. Rowan nodded. Then let's hope you're as unstoppable as they say. They sprinted across the first bridge. Jackson took the lead, shooting drones out of the air and disabling turret nodes with quick, precise bursts. The chamber shook as the creature behind the containment field struck the barrier again. A ripple of energy blasted through the room, knocking Rowan to his knees. Jackson pulled him up without slowing. The console flickered with warnings. Overload imminent. Containment compromised. Rowan placed his hands on the interface, fingers flying across alien glyphs. I can redirect energy into the stabilizer core. But someone has to manually lock the clamps inside the core chamber. Jackson knew what that meant. The core chamber was a closed capsule. No one inside could survive the pressure and radiation once the system activated. Rowan looked at him, eyes tight with fear but full of determination. Let me do it. You're the only one who can stop the dreadnought. This is my mess. My responsibility. Jackson grabbed his wrist, stopping him. You're not dying here. Rowan tried to pull away. Jackson, I have nothing left. No family. No home. You do. You still have something to go back to. Jackson tightened his grip. My sister is gone. Rowan stilled. Jackson's voice dropped lower, steadier. And I'm not losing anyone else. Not today. Before Rowan could argue, Jackson shoved him behind the console and locked his suit's override, preventing Rowan from entering the chamber. Rowan pounded his fists against the panel. Jackson. Don't do this. Jackson stepped into the core chamber. The door sealed behind him with a hiss. Inside, the controls glowed bright, waiting for final activation. The chamber trembled violently as the first hunger struck the barrier again. Jackson felt the heat rising, the metal vibrating beneath his feet. His sister's dog tag rested against his chest. He closed his eyes for a moment, exhaled once, then activated the clamps. Energy surged into the stabilizer core. The containment fields brightened, turning from flickering orange to blazing white. Rowan's voice cracked over the comm. Jackson, it's working. The awakening is reversing. But the system is overloading. The whole chamber will collapse. Jackson braced himself as the walls shook violently. Do what you have to do. Save whoever's left on this planet. Rowan's voice. Silence settled over Gorthos after the explosion, a silence so absolute that even the molten rivers seemed to dim. Dust and fractured stone drifted through the air like ash from a dying star. Rowan staggered out of a collapsing tunnel, coughing and blinking through the haze, his body trembling from exhaustion and grief. The chamber where Jackson had sealed the first hunger was now a crater of blazing white residue slowly fading into normal light. But no sound came from within. No movement. Rowan sank to his knees, chest heaving as he stared at the glowing ruins. The Reaper was gone. Above the broken sky, Earthfleet dropships cut through the clouds, engines roaring as emergency response teams deployed across the shattered battlefield. Some rushed toward wounded civilians, others began sweeping for remaining Zelthari forces. But Rowan stayed still, staring at the place where Jackson had stood moments before the world erupted. The ground trembled again, a delayed shockwave pushing dust outward. Rowan lowered his head and whispered a soft apology, the weight of loss crushing him. The man who had saved the galaxy from a creature older than time had done so alone, buried under a planet that had swallowed him whole. A shadow fell across Rowan. He looked up to see a massive Zelthari cruiser spiraling out of control overhead, smoke pouring from its engines. It crashed into the far horizon with a thunderous roar, sending a shockwave across the plains. Earthfleet fighters pursued the remaining alien vessels, pushing them back toward orbit. The Zelthari leadership had not expected their plan to fail, and now their forces were retreating in chaos. Moments later, a figure in Earthfleet armor approached Rowan. Admiral Serena Cole removed her helmet, her eyes filled with grim urgency. Dr. Rowan, we received your transmission. Is it contained? Rowan nodded weakly. Jackson closed it. Permanently. Cole exhaled slowly, the tension in her shoulders easing. The galaxy owes him more than it can ever repay. Rowan wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. I told him not to go in there. He didn't listen. He never listened. Cole looked toward the ruins, jaw tightening. He listened to what mattered. He always did. Rescue crews began combing the blast site for debris or remains, but Rowan knew they would find nothing. The stabilizer core had imploded inward, creating a focused burst of energy that sealed the first hunger behind layers of collapsing stone and molten crust. No one could have survived inside. As Earthfleet secured the area, a distress signal erupted from the sky. A Zelthari dreadnought, damaged but not destroyed, had begun charging a planetary bombardment weapon. Cole immediately activated her comm all ships, redirect fire to Sector 14. Take that dreadnought down. But even as she gave the order, a new energy reading appeared on her visor. A single heat signature moving on the far edge of the crater. Rowan froze. Admiral, something's alive out there. Cole frowned. Impossible. Nothing could have survived the implosion radius. Rowan didn't wait for authorization. He ran toward the crater's edge, sliding down loose stone and molten gravel until he reached a ledge overlooking the epicenter. The dust swirled there thicker than anywhere else, drifting like a ghostly fog. And through it, a silhouette moved. Cole arrived behind Rowan as the figure stepped forward from the haze. The matte black armor was scorched, melted in places, but unmistakable. Jackson Hale dropped to one knee, exhausted, helmet cracked, armor flickering as its systems struggled to stay active. His breaths were shallow but steady. Rowan felt his heart seize. You're alive. Jackson lifted his gaze slowly, visor fractured but reflective. Not sure for how long, he muttered, voice strained, but still carrying that familiar quiet grit. Cole knelt beside him, helping stabilize him. When the core blew, we lost your signal. Jackson coughed, the sound rough and painful. The suit's internal barrier held just long enough. Everything else didn't. Rowan tried not to look emotional, but tears spilled anyway. "You're unbelievable," he said. Jackson smirked faintly. "That's what people keep telling me." Before either of them could say more, the ground shook violently. The Zelthari dreadnought had locked onto their coordinates, preparing to fire its superweapon directly at the planet's surface. Cole's comm crackled. "Admiral, we can't intercept the beam in time. They'll wipe the site." Cole's face hardened. "Not while I'm standing here." Jackson placed a hand on her arm. "You won't need to." He pushed himself up, swaying slightly. Rowan reached to steady him, but Jackson waved him off. Above them, the dreadnought charged its main cannon, a massive sphere of charged plasma growing brighter and brighter. Earthfleet ships tried to break formation and intercept, but they were too far. Jackson opened a compartment on his damaged gauntlet and withdrew a compact beacon core. Rowan recognized it. It was a portable warp anchor, a last resort device capable of destabilizing energy beams by creating micro-rifts. Jackson activated it and tossed it into the air. The beacon shot upward, unfolding into a spinning lattice. A micro-rift tore open just as the dreadnought fired. The plasma beam hit the rift, twisting violently, then bent upward and discharged harmlessly into space. The dreadnought's weapon systems overloaded instantly. A chain reaction ripped through its hull, and the massive vessel exploded in a blinding flare. Rowan staggered back, shielding his eyes. Cole stared at Jackson, stunned. "You just saved half the quadrant." Jackson shrugged a little. "Still doesn't bring my sister back." Rowan's expression softened. "What you did here honors her more than anything else ever could." The planet rumbled beneath them as the vault finally sealed, ancient mechanisms locking into place. The threat of the first hunger faded completely. The warlord's grand plan was finished. Hours later, Jackson was aboard an Earthfleet medical cruiser in orbit. Doctors worked on stabilizing him, but he drifted in and out of consciousness, hearing fragments of conversation. "The Zelthari Council has surrendered. Their war fleets are withdrawing. Dozens of species are calling for peace negotiations. Earth is being hailed as the victor of the century." But none of that mattered to him. He only saw Mara's face, smiling from an old memory, telling him he carried too much weight alone. When he finally woke fully, the cruiser was quiet. A small box sat on the table beside him. Metal, simple, unmarked. Jackson frowned and picked it up. Inside lay a crystal shard faintly glowing with ancient markings. The same markings he had seen on the vault walls beneath Gorthos. Rowan entered the room and froze when he saw the shard. "Someone delivered that while you were unconscious," he said. "No signature. No traces." Jackson held the shard up, watching the faint patterns shift like living ink. The first hunger was sealed. But this crystal pulsed with the same ancient energy. Rowan's voice was barely above a whisper. "Jackson, that shouldn't exist. Everything in that vault was destroyed or locked away forever." Jackson slid the shard into a small compartment on his medical tray and closed it.